for the nice introduction. I'm Seori Sachs, and tonight I just want to talk about one art piece that's a little bit pretentious, but a piece that I was working on recently in this IDE called Processing. And I just want to discuss that a little bit since I sort of do it as a side hobby. Yeah, so just a short background on who I am. I've always had a lifelong fascination and love for interactive and generative mediums, whether it be video games or just being really mesmerized by GIFs that I see on the internet created by code. But I didn't really get into it until I took some game dev classes and I did a little bit of audio programming for games. Back when I was at NYU. And it all came to a head when I took this creative code class called Creative Coding, which is pretty straightforward, and was introduced to this program language called Processing, which was rather pretty intuitive for me as someone who doesn't have like a instinctual mathematical or scientific mind or anything like that. So this has sort of been a tool that I've been using. I'm going to discuss pseudo-text generation, or just the concept of touching on the concept of narrative computation a little bit. And this was spurred by my time at School for Poetic Computation. I don't know how many of you know it, but it's this artist initiative down in the Lower West Village, or Lower West Side, that their whole ethos is mixing tech and art at its fundamental, whether it's using hardware and using physical programming to accomplish something, or doing something extremely abstract. And I was really inspired by this class I took called Code Narratives in July for 2 weeks. I would love to go back. It was really formative, and I would love to take one of their longer, like a 10-week intensive courses. But I was, exposed to natural language processing and just sort of the idea of text generation a lot, which still eludes me. I'm not, pretending to be a expert in the subject matter or anything like that, but it's something that I try and work on through little projects like this that I attempt to, bridge together. Thoughts and prayers, which I will discuss today, like I said before, created in processing, came together after I read a really disheartening op-ed piece in the New Yorker about a relatively young, I think she was 23 at the time I read this, a relatively young news journalist. She recently graduated and got into this, and she wrote an op-ed piece in the New Yorker about her career trajectory in the current political climate in terms of school shootings. And it's something really struck out to me, this little passage here. I don't need to read the whole thing, but I'll start here with, I tweeted his quotes from different stories about all the shootings I've covered because I recognize the similarity of the speech. Not to discredit the unique experiences each time, but it feels so familiar. You could almost auto-populate these stories, just fill in where it happened and how many killed. You can add the color and the details, but you need to realize it's the same. The gunshot blast to the school hallway or the airport terminal or the nightclub. And while I read that, it's a really sad piece about how in her short time she's already covered 3 or 4 of these shootings at such a young point in her life, and was really struck by that sentiment of how you can just sort of ad-lib a lot of the tweets in particular, but it could be really any social media platform on sort of the coverage of what we experience every time we go through this. So I wanted to just do a little bit of a project on that, and I'm not taking any quotes from anyone who is directly affected by it, of course, but more sort of I grabbed, especially after the Parkland, Florida shooting happened, I grabbed a lot of politicians or people in municipalities or local governments, or at least statewide, because that way it's a little bit more impersonal, I felt. I started to see some interesting patterns when I was doing this. So I'll talk a little bit about the sort of code skeleton of this project and sort of some of the more observations that I witnessed throughout this. I grabbed a whole bunch. A lot of it was like a mix of human discrimination and computer generation, and I used Python to just simply pull certain aspects of the tweets that I got. So I went and just sort of like looked at, I think I even looked at the hashtag that was trending at the time, and just basically what I did in order to, so I didn't get a whole bunch, because this was such a hot topic, was copy and paste some of the ones that I felt were sort of alluding to Lulu Ramadan's quote in the previous slide, and basically just sort of siphon through them using Python. So I'm sure this looks very simple to many of you, and in some ways that's basically what I wanted to accomplish, basically. And what I did was basically create a plain text file, and then I siphoned out some of the words through word count, through really basic Python functionalities like reading and splitting it. And early in my process, I saw a lot of the same words kind of coming up in just like 10 tweets at the time, and I think I stuck around that number just for my own understandability. So yeah, I noticed a lot of the same words coming up over again: thoughts, prayers, shooting, of course, is a big one. There's a longer list, but I just wanted to make this brief as possible. And using just the simple random function, I got a lot of the same terms coming out again. So yeah, please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But this is all pretty simple Python functionality. I siphoned out stop words, so basic pronouns like I, me, my, myself, we, our, anything that's up there, just to sort of really get at the crux of sort of the patterns that I was seeing in terms of the language that was being utilized. And then once I siphoned those out, it definitely slimmed down the word options, which is great, to sort of actually see a pattern emerging. Yeah.
What are you using the stop words for?
I'm pulling out words like I, me, myself, your, him, that really don't, I felt like were serving the pattern purpose that I was trying to find. I was looking for more, because these pronoun words basically, I don't know if they're pronouns or not, but these stop words, that's a variable name that I used, basically aren't really pertaining to the phenomenon that I was kind of looking after. So I was just getting rid of them out of my search, basically. And so, yeah, all pretty simple. Pulling words with the variable, and then I just sort of use that function to pull them out. So then I redid on the right side of the screen, I kind of redid this search and tried to find the most top common words that were being utilized. And then I started to sort of see more of a pattern that was more specific to this event. You get things like family, shooting, of course, like we discussed in the other slide, community, heartbreaking, prayers, victims first responders is a big one that I kept seeing over and over again. And of course, Florida, just because it happened to be this this case, but kind of alluding to what the New Yorker quote was saying, you could unfortunately sort of swap those geographic markers out anytime. And that's what I was sort of starting to notice. And so, yeah, I created this counter module to sort of count how many times that kind of came up in the very few tweets that I actually got. So then I wanted to actually do something with this a little bit, just a little bit of a sardonic project on my part. And at School for Poetic Computation, like I said, I learned a little bit about basic language processing. And this tool that was utilized by Alison Parrish, who's pretty big in this scene, was called Spacey, which is correct me if I'm wrong, but if anyone knows, but it's a Python natural language processing that acts like C a little bit, hence I did a little bit of research, and it's also written in what this language called Python, which is sort of the combination of the two. And what my purpose was just analyzing common words and parts of speech, especially the parts of speech, because Spacey is capable of Markov chains and doing much more complex things than what I was doing, but in this case, I just wanted to sort of see parts of speech in order to sort of build this project that was sort of marinating in my head. This was the start of it. You could just go to spacey.io and import it. And what this does is download the most updated version of the entire English language, or at least the most standard American grammar. So I don't think it really adapts for like internet speak or anything like that, but that is served its purpose, and it takes like about 15 to 20 minutes to plug in. But once you have it, you have pretty much the entire English language at your fingertips, basically. And right off the bat, the Spacey library gives us an access to a number of interesting qualifications of texts, so to see. A huge one was parts of speech, like what words are nouns, what are adjectives, what are adverbs, and so on and so forth. What are sentences, is able to discriminate that. Known entities like the names of places, peoples, brands, which is utilized with doc-ent for short for entities. And then do a little bit of research in all of the noun chunks, so nouns and text plus surrounding matter like adjectives and articles. So written by people much smarter than I, it's able to sort of discriminate against all of the plain text I was putting in and sort of split it up. Based on that information, I was able to sort of pull out certain attributes that I was looking for using the functions up at the top of the screen. So what I was really looking for was parts of speech for the most part. Looking for what is a noun, what is a verb, adjective, adverb, that's what they're all short for in case anyone doesn't know. And pulling out what was sort of common in that. So right here, the Spacey parser allows you to sort of check what parts of speech a word belongs to. For this project, I ended up looking at adjectives and adverbs, but also looked at verbs and nouns just for curiosity's sake. But I ended up using adjectives a lot for the most part. And it started, like on the right of the screen, those are some of the adverbs that it pulled from the whole chunk of text. I was basically creating a ad lib. Okay. Well, this was a prototype, but I was creating a Oh, okay, great. I was sort of creating a ad lib kind of uh, maker, or just how would I say, like a project, I guess. And basically, at first, what I would do is TP stands for thoughts and prayers, and it would just basically cycle between, every time you clicked on it, it would cycle between thoughts or prayers. That's not that interesting, but I also had a longer prototype in which I sort of had, you know, this blank shooting felt this way, and put adjective in terms of where blank was supposed to be, and then you clicked on adjective, and it cycled through all of the adjectives. And so after sort of getting basic functionality up and running, it definitely started making some observations in terms of what I was seeing. You know, I felt like I pulled a healthy amount of tweets. I didn't quite remember how many I pulled, but I ended up getting a really small pool of actual data because it seems like everyone was using the same phrasing over and over again, which might have been reflected in some of the numbers that were in the previous slides. Like only 23 out of like, let's say 50 tweets that I might have pulled. A lot of the parts of speech ended up being the same. Due to sort of my lack of ability, I would say that there's still a lot of human culling for it to make sense in this case. I didn't want it to sort of be completely disengaged from the original source material. But that being said, there's still a little bit of human discrimination that I injected in there. So forgive me if this seems a little bit stilted. And also one more interesting thing was just like the amount of focus that this took for a lot of the people that I was pulling. It was just about like a day of tweets, or like, over the course of a few hours, of course. But that also contributed to this rather small pool of data, because these people, politicians mainly for the most part, basically just gave it less than 24 hours worth of notice, and so there's not much after a while that you could go on after. So enough rambling. I threw this up on openprocessing.org, and I like to just think of it as sort of like a real-time processing website in which you could upload your processing projects, basically. And anyone is just welcome to sort of play around with them. And so I created a really rough pseudo fake Twitter account here, in which basically it will just basically pull. Okay, that's really tiny. Let's see. Is there a way to make this screen a little bit? Can everyone see that? No? Okay. Is that a little bit better? Okay. Please let me know if it needs to be bigger. So basically, yeah, it's a pretty short project. I got the auto text, or the boilerplate text of anytime you create a tweet, you press 2 to sort of activate it. Yeah, you sort of click through and sort of like notice a pattern after a while. Terribly saddened by the tragedy of today. The solution of this ongoing problem is clearly background checks, and that last part changes because I used a variable called excuses, and I would just I pulled from an array of excuses that I kept seeing over and over again, and randomize it every time. Always grateful for our law enforcement of insert your own municipality of the area here. be Parkland last month. It'll be something next month. Reminded that I saw a lot of people reminded that this one was really interesting because, well, this is pulled from Mike Huckabee's Twitter account, and I don't know if you guys are really familiar with him, but he's pretty pro Second Amendments, and remember this came from a tweet basically that I copied and pasted and said, reminded that Israel pretty much eliminated these tragedies by not placing the blame on the weapon, but by, I think he might have said, solving background checks or something. So that's just, I think I used mental health or background checks or anything. Horrified was a adjective that I pulled from the emotions array. Today's shooting was senseless. Senseless is another one. All we can do is send the victim our thoughts. Our thoughts are with the victims. Solution to this ongoing problem is clearly mental health. And yeah, this is just pulling from an array of sentences, starter sentences, using a Java function called, look at the code here, get my mess of a code, using a Java function called, replace first, so whatever you see. I basically had wrote in adjectives, so it would find the string adjectives and replace that with the array random adjectives, and basically came up with that. So that concludes thoughts and prayers. Things I wanted to do more was making it a little bit more interactive in terms of how it was presented. So maybe typewriter text, and what that means is animating each string so that it looks like as if you're typing it, or blinking cursor. I was able to iterate these things, but for the sake of this presentation, I don't want to break the whole thing. So that's basically sort of my on and off project at sort of the end of March that I was working on. Thank you for your time.
Question for you: what was your biggest wins on this project, and what you learned from the hardest things?
Well, getting even some of it to kind of work was interesting. It's for me. I mean, I'm not a full-time programmer or anything like that, so just the whole process of learning how to pull arrays. I know that seems. I'm pretty sure that sounds really simple to a lot of you, but sort of getting that a little bit more streamlined. I zoomed in so much that you don't see it, but getting just a little bit of customization on terms of what was going on, instead of just putting it to the console, was pretty useful as well. And yeah, sort of like the things that I would have liked to have happened is just to make it be a little bit more juicy looking in terms of interaction. Blinker, the text being typed out, having a bigger pool of data would have been nice, but that's not what I got at the end. So yeah.
What would be the future? Like, what would the next steps for the project?
This project's pretty depressing. So I don't want to dwell on it anymore, and I don't want this project to be naming or shaming anyone, even though I just called out Mike Huckabee. I mean, some people really do change their perspective, but I mean, I don't want to dwell on this project anymore. For my own personal goals, I'd love to be a little bit more comfortable and with natural language processing in general, and sort of get in even deeper with Spacey or really any other natural language processing. Natural processing language. Sorry, I've been saying it the wrong the entire time. Yeah, and just get even deeper in that. Maybe, I don't know, write some auto-generative books or poems or something, and sort of play around with that a little bit more. For the next few days, I might just try and get those components happening with this project, but yeah, I don't want to go on and on about school shootings because it gets sad after a while. You know, you start to see these patterns, and yeah, and sort of reflect on what can be changed. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I had some ideas about continue on what you said, but I mean, you could do some kind of sentiment analysis. You could, create like categories like commiseration, outrage, sarcasm, the typical reactions that you see, and then possibly take actual quotes when an event occurs. Take a random quote and kind of see how far apart they are.
Yeah.
Say, this guy said this, and this is like one standard deviation from a random
Yeah, space.
commiseration quote.
Yeah.
Just to show like people just come up with these boilerplate responses, and every time it's really the same.
Yeah, that would have been interesting, and also even in a data visualization kind of sense, I'm pretty sure. Spacey, I don't know if anyone knows, but also does exactly that. If you put in a word like hamburger, it'll be able to sort of pull words that, and you input a array of like things that say pen or water bottle, unicorn, hot dog, and it'll be able to calculate the standard deviation of how related it is to hamburger. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's an awesome idea in terms of sentiment, and seeing, or even just seeing how often the same phrases keep coming up. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thanks.
My question is, how does the space also make distinction between term that is created with punctuation? In one of your slides, there was like term school, I think.
Yeah.
One with no dot, like with no creative, and one term with the school and one with. So how does the parser make the distinction between two terms and render the occurrences as like two different? What happens in case if the parser encounter a term in the language other than
Yeah, those are both good questions. Well, if I'm understanding your first question correctly about like punctuation, I mean that's also a relatively simple Python thing that it's able to detect like a period or a comma or anything and delete it if you so ask for its removal. So yeah, I'm sure the function that I used pretty much just like eliminated that just for my own purposes of sort of customizing it for this. If you put in something other than English, I mean the file was called like en_language. So yeah, I think that could get pretty hairy pretty quickly. I do not know if Spacey has other dictionaries. Maybe it does. Or maybe there's another natural language processing that does something for French or something for Japanese or something for Hebrew or something. I've never played around with just like inputting other languages, but I'm pretty sure it'd just be like errors, especially if you're not using the English language, like you're not using a Germanic language or something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure. If anyone happens to know, that'd be great. Yeah.
When you were parsing the sample data, were there any words that you really captured or either, or that really stood out for you when you were doing this project with regards to very important incidents, but in this case, against national?
Yeah. I never realized how many times people say grateful for our first responders. I'm not it's something that really stuck out. I don't even think anyone was grateful for anything else. So, like, think I found one other tweet that was like, grateful for the police or something like that. But yeah, I was really struck by how many people were grateful for the first responders. I was struck by, especially in particular, the list of hypothetical reasons why this happened. Mental health was a big one. People blaming background checks is a huge one. In terms of political flavor, I tried to make it pretty 50-50 in terms of purely tweets that were reacting to it. So in terms of a political party. So I would say this was a 60-40 split, 60% more right-wing and 40% more left-wing. And found a lot of the right-wingers. I don't know how many of you are Americans, but we have this problem with right-wingers, saying this is tragic, but it's guns don't kill people, people kill people. That was often a sentiment that I saw. That came up alarmingly a lot, more than I thought it would. I mean, I always kind of, I don't like to go down the Twitter rabbit hole too many times, but I always kind of naively thought those sentiments were just, people saying that on Twitter just because they can. But I was kind of really surprised to see how many of our elected leaders went with that sort of verbiage. Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you.
To be with Rebecca.